Hello, and thank you for joining the PRN Legislative Member Briefing Series. This is the first of two. Save the date to join us on March 10th for our next member briefing. Today, we will be hearing from Robert Hirschfeld and Andrew Rain, who will walk us through the Power Act and how you can take action to help protect Illinois from the impacts of data centers. The Power in the Power Act stands for Protecting Our Water, Energy, and Ratepayers from Data Center Impacts. This legislation creates protections for communities, ratepayers, and the environment from the impacts of data centers, requiring transparency and accountability. My name is Randa Watts, and I am the Clean Water Organizer here at PRN, and I will be your facilitator for today's webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and if you have any questions along the way, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and we will save some time to address those questions at the end. For some brief introductions, Robert Hirschfeld is our Director of Water Policy. He leads PRN's efforts to protect water quality, water quantity, water access, and water equity for all of Illinois. Andrew Rain is our Director of Climate Policy. He provides technical and policy expertise in support of Prairie Rivers energy and coal pollution programs. I will hand it to Robert.
Great. Thank you, Randa. Appreciate it. Yep, my name is Robert Hirschfeld. I'm the Director of Water Policy here at Prairie Rivers Network. So we're here today to talk about data centers. And is that working? Okay, sorry. Let's start at the beginning. What is a data center, right? So data centers have been around for a while. They are basically massive warehouses filled with thousands of computer servers, and the internet runs on data centers. So every time you send a text, stream a show, use GPS, chat GPT if you're using AI tools, that request goes through a data center. And as the internet has been around for decades, so have data centers. But what we are seeing is that we are entering a new era because of generative AI. And that means many, many more data centers, and they are much larger. So sometimes you hear these called hyperscale data centers, and these are not small buildings. You can see in the slide there. There's a couple data centers in Chicago outside of O'Hare. These are relatively small in terms of energy use relative to what is coming in. So we're talking about facilities that can cover hundreds of acres, and they generate a lot of heat through that computing power, and that heat has to be cooled. So running and cooling those servers requires a tremendous amount of energy, and it can potentially require a lot of water, and that's kind of what we're talking about today and how we're going to address this issue. So Illinois has energy, it has water, and it has the fiber optic connectivity to transmit the data that these data centers need. So data centers are coming to Illinois. I do want to put a pin on that claim that Illinois has water and energy, and I will come back to that in a minute. But right now, we have something like 200 data centers operating in Illinois. Again, these are typically smaller than what we're seeing coming in, and there are 80 to 100. There are dozens and dozens coming in all around the state. Nationally, there's something like 3,000 with another 1,000 on the way, and Illinois is a target. So we have been hearing from people all over the state over the last few months. Data centers are coming in everywhere. I've heard from people in Sangamon County, heard from people in Pekin, Essex near Kankakee, Joliet, and in fact, there's discussion of a 300-acre data center that is looking to locate somewhere between Champaign and Mahomet, and you can see on that map there, what would 300 acres between Champaign and Mahomet look like? And it's a sizable footprint. And I'm happy to take questions at the end if anyone has more questions on that specific proposal, but today we're going to kind of focus on what we're doing statewide. So people are concerned about what data centers mean for their communities. What does it mean? I'm going to start, there's several issues. I'm going to start with the big one, and that's energy, right? So these data centers use a lot of energy. The hyperscale AI data centers use a lot. It just requires a lot of compute. The Joliet data center that's coming in is 1,800 megawatts, 800-acre facility. The one that's coming in Sangamon County at 636 megawatts. The one that I mentioned proposed for Champaign County would be 300 acres. We don't know yet the megawatts. Well, what are those? Let's put those numbers in context. What does that mean? So Prairie State Energy Campus has a massive energy thermoelectric plant that produces 1,600 megawatts of energy. So that's less than the one coming in Joliet. That Prairie State is the seventh largest source of CO2 pollution in the United States. So we're talking big numbers. Here's another one I'll throw at you just to get a sense of scale. There's a data center that's slated to come in Yorkville. There'll be 2 gigawatts. 2 gigawatts is enough to power 1.7 million homes, more than all the homes in the city of Chicago. So again, this is a lot of energy. All right. So on to water. This is one we've heard a lot about. This is a little more in flux because there are different ways that data centers can use water. But what are the numbers we're talking about? So large scale data center, if it's using evaporative cooling. So let me just back up 1 second. So like I said, these data centers, they're storing all these servers, and the servers get hot and they have to cool the servers down so they don't burn out. And one way they can do that is just to take water, run it through the system, and basically evaporate it. And if these data centers are using evaporative cooling, we could be talking millions of gallons a day. That is equivalent to the use of a city of 40 to 50,000 people, so comparable to DeKalb, Illinois. Now, there are certain technologies that they can implement that require less water. So what's called closed loop cooling. You have a one-time pull of water, and then you just recirculate that water throughout the system over time. You don't need to continually draw more water. But if you're using that kind of technology, you're using a lot more energy, which is what this slide is intended to show. So even if you're using less water directly, that thermoelectric plant, if you're pulling from a plant or if you're pulling from the grid, there could be a lot more water usage off-site. So energy and water are the big ones. You hear a lot of talk about that, but there are other issues as well that I will touch on very briefly. Noise. So there was an issue up in Aurora that the power went out, and so these data centers are equipped with dozens and dozens of backup generators. And when they turned these generators on, the noise was massive. One resident described it like a helicopter on our roof. There's also air pollution associated with running these backup diesel generators. So in addition to noise, there's light pollution. There is also there's a potential problem with concentrating pollutants that pre-exist. So if you're drawing millions of gallons of water a day and you're evaporating, if there are already pollutants in that water, you could be concentrating those pollutants and when you put it back in, which is what has happened at the Amazon data centers out in Oregon, exacerbating the nitrate problem that pre-existed. So I also think it's important to situate this in the context of what's happening with the federal government and what our current state laws are around land use and water. We'll just mention quickly the wetlands. So Illinois has already lost about 90% of its historic wetlands. And due to recent rollbacks to the Clean Water Act, both from the Supreme Court and from the Trump administration, about 90% to 95% of the wetlands that remain in the state no longer have Clean Water Act protection. And the state has yet to take action to pass state protections. So I've looked into where a lot of these data centers are siting, and almost without fail, they are siting in places where there are wetlands that would have been protected under the Clean Water Act 3 years ago, but now are not. And so I will just note that is why Prairie Rivers Network is working on state wetlands protections. If you're interested in that issue, we will have another member briefing shortly talking about specifically that wetlands bill. But the big one that I want to talk about is Illinois' lack of a comprehensive framework for regulating and managing water. So Illinois relies on English common law that was literally developed centuries ago, made for another place, made for another time, or a rainy, damp English manner. We have never updated those laws. So historically, Illinois is a water-rich state. We haven't had many water conflicts because, if anything, we've had a too much water problem. That abundance has essentially made us complacent, and we have not addressed our outdated and unworkable water laws. Now, we've historically been water rich. Is that changing? I'd say yes. This is the current drought map. Um, Over 80% of the state right now is in drought. That even includes the last several days of rain. This drought goes back months, and so and we are in extreme drought down here in central Illinois. You can see there with that the darker red. Something like 19 counties in central Illinois are experiencing extreme drought. And we've remade the landscape. I mentioned already we've destroyed the wetlands. We've tile drained 10 million acres of fields. Our surface drainage is all intended to get water away, and so we've relied on a system that's meant to get water off the land, not store water, not hold water. And water use today is very different than it was in the 1800s England, right? So we use 10 billion gallons of water a day statewide. A lot of that is by industry, mainly power plants. And we have we have a much larger population now. Um, Irrigation is up, right? So we're not talking about a couple of head of livestock and an English manor. We're talking about millions and millions of acres of row crop, uh, industrial ag, and large center pivot irrigation systems. And these can withdraw, a million, 2 million gallons a day. And irrigation is only expected to increase, particularly if we see drought conditions like we are right now. So I'd suggest that the crisis is here, right? City of Decatur is implementing water restrictions. We're seeing it in Bloomington. Sullivan's water table dropped 15 feet. They can't get their residents water. When we do not have the legal framework to deal with this problem, as anyone who owns land can essentially pump out water as long as that use is reasonable. So we don't have a statewide permitting system. We don't have a good system to protect in-stream flows. It's not connected to water quality. It doesn't manage groundwater and surface water and connected. It's a very poor system to plan and manage conflict. Now, Prairie Rivers Network is working on that broader issue. If you're interested in it, I recently published an op-ed in the Chicago Sun-Times. You can link to the QR code, or you can search it online. I kind of lay out what I'm talking about here. We think the first step is just to simply measure what we're using. We don't even know who's using what water. There's a reporting requirement, but it's not enforced, and so we don't have good data. I think that's a logical first step. Prairie Rivers Network is working on that. However, that is a bigger question. That is a bigger question about all water users. And right now we are seeing these data centers coming in, asking for needing large amounts of water. And so we need to address the imminent threat, and that is the data center. And I'm going to turn it over here to Andrew in a second. He's going to talk about what we're doing specifically on data centers, on their energy and water use. But I also want to take 1 second, because I think it's worth addressing this. Here's Sam Altman. He's the CEO of OpenAI, ChatGPT. And he said a couple weeks ago, the water issue around AI is fake. And guess what? He said, do you know how much food and energy it takes to grow a baby? And as a AI and data center skeptic, I would just encourage Sam to keep talking about it. But this is a talking point that we're hearing a lot. This AI water use is fake. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, a data center can use less water. If it's using less water, it's using more energy. So even if we're just talking about data centers, there's a large water usage. But it's also important to understand that data centers themselves are just buildings full of servers. And the whole AI economy is a much larger supply chain. Before a data center even opens, there's mining for lithium, cobalt, and other rare earth minerals. There's semiconductor fabrication, which itself can use enormous amounts of water and energy, tens of millions of gallons a day. And then there's the construction of these facilities. So no, absolutely not. The AI water use issue is not fake, particularly when you're thinking about the entire supply chain. And so that's why, but what we have coming in that we can address right now is data centers. And so I'm going to turn it over to Andrew to talk about the Power Act, which is intended to regulate data centers coming into Illinois.
Thanks, Robert. And I want to just touch on one more challenge of data centers before we get into the Power Act and its solutions, because this is a big part of it. Robert identified energy usage, water, community impacts. The way that energy usage translates into energy affordability is really critical here. Probably everybody has seen their rates go up on their energy bill in the last year. A lot of that is being driven by data center development. Actually, we're seeing the forecast of data center development is coming back and causing rates to go up already. So I just want to talk through why we're seeing that, and then we'll go through solutions on the Power Act itself and how it's going to solve a lot of these problems. So here's how we are paying for data centers right now, and it comes in four different ways. And credit to the Citizens Utility Board for laying out a lot of this information in this slide in a really clear way. So the two that I'm going to highlight that are the biggest ones are transmission and distribution and capacity. But so transmission distribution, when you build a data center, you need to get the energy there. And as Robert noted, some of these sites are requiring as much energy as the biggest coal plant in our state makes all at one data center. And so you have to have a big enough wires to bring it all there. And that has implications across the entire system. The way our grid has been developed, most of our programs sort of socialize cost. We all pay to maintain our infrastructure. And that theory worked when single users were not this big. But when a single user is this big, it does not make sense to socialize these costs over everybody. When the data center is coming in with its pockets of money, they could be paying for this. So transmission distribution is a big one. Energy is, the actual energy that data centers use. The way that they make us all pay more is that by using a ton of energy, the cost of energy goes up, right? This is simple supply and demand. As demand goes up, cost goes up. In addition to energy, capacity is a critical element of how our grid works. So capacity is the ability to make energy, and not the energy itself, but let's imagine it's that hottest day in the summer. We need to have enough capacity on our grid to meet that demand. We've created a construct called the capacity market, and we are paying, when we pay our energy bills, we're paying to incentivize there to be enough power on the grid to meet that high demand. And this is why when a bunch of data centers come in and say, we're going to demand a bunch of new energy, the capacity market responds by saying, oh crap, we have to incentivize the creation of a ton of new generation to meet that single high demand moment. That's the capacity market. The last one is actually renewable energy credits, renewable energy credits are the way we pay for renewable energy, and the cost of those, similar to how the cost of energy goes up, the cost of renewable energy credits also goes up. There's a slight error in the slide. So diving into the capacity problem, here's how we stack up our resources. When we have to meet, when the capacity market's trying to meet that high demand day, they buy the cheapest resource first. So what's the cheapest resource? Renewable energy. It's free. Generating renewable energy is free. So they buy the capacity that's generated by renewables, which is less than a lot of the fossil generation, but it's free in there. So that goes first. Then nuclear, then combined cycle, that's gas, then coal, and then up at the top are these combustion turbines. Those are the last things that we buy. These are expensive. They're called peaker gas plants. They're the most polluting. They don't run very often. They run like once a year, and they turn on basically simply to meet that high demand moment. And so this is our hottest day in the summer. And we have our peak demand. It spikes right there at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the sun is beating down. Everybody's maxing out their AC. And these data centers are going to be maxing out their cooling. Peak demand, we have our highest demand happening. So we stacked up our resources to meet that demand. Again, this is what's happening in the energy market. And we have our most expensive resources there. Well, a data center adds to that demand by raising this whole curve. Data centers say we need to operate 24/7, 365. We need to always be operating. So they're going to push this up. If we could get them to not operate during these peak moments, we actually could, our costs would all be going down. But the fact that they're saying they want to operate 24/7 is what's driving up this capacity, and it's impacting our bills. So we buy the next most expensive resource so that we can meet that capacity demand. So we have to, and when I say we, I mean this is socialized. We are all paying for the cost of capacity, the capacity market. So this is another way that the data center is uniquely driving a demand that we all have to pay for. So those are the problems. It's hitting our bills, it's taking our water, it's challenging our energy resources, it's impacting communities. The Power Act is the solution. So the Power Act is a piece of legislation been developed largely by the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, which is a coalition of environmental groups in Illinois. And we sort of are approaching data centers from a threefold. We've got the energy problems, the water problems, community problems. And this is the package that we'd like to see done so that we can protect our water resources, protect consumers from increasing energy costs, and make sure that our communities are, when a data center comes to town, that they're not unfairly having to negotiate with a powerhouse like Meta or another super rich company, that they have critical protections in place. So I'm going to break this down piece by piece. Apologize, these slides are a little bit text heavy, but you want to make sure that is clear what this bill does. So on the energy side, the first thing we do is create something called a hyperscale data center tariff. So this is tariffs on the big data centers. What's a tariff? This is the term that means like the rules for them joining the grid. And the tariff will, those rules will allocate charges. So getting the correctly designed data center tariff will mean that they will pay for their transmission costs. The tariff will appropriately see the cost of transmission that will be allocated to that data center and allocate them correctly. If that's in place, that transmission and distribution concern that box is checked. The next part is addressing that capacity concern. And one of Illinois' goals is to avert catastrophic climate change by doing Illinois' part in building out clean energy to meet the energy demands of the state. So not only do we need data centers to be bringing their own capacity, but if we want to hit our climate goals, which we do, we're going to need them to be able to bring new clean energy capacity. So the policy is called, the acronym, Bring Your Own New Clean Energy, Clean Capacity and Energy, is Beyonce, which is a great acronym. And that's the requirement. If you want to do business here, you have to be bringing energy to meet capacity to meet that demand. We are proposing a flexible version of this, mostly because we wanted to not go flexible, but we got pushback. And so what we're proposing is a flexible version that says, whatever percentage you bring, you have to bring your own capacity. Whatever percentage you bring that's clean, we will guarantee you firm service. So what does firm service mean? That means that's the energy 24/7. That's the energy during that peak moment that's really challenging. So if you bring half of your energy as clean energy capacity, you'll get half of your energy demand guaranteed firm during that peak moment. And we all get firm service. That's the standard service is firm service. That's the service that you get to your house. What the remaining percentage that they're not bringing, we're going to give them flexible, not firm service. And that means if they are not if we get to a pinch moment, we can cut them off for that remaining percentage. So this, we think, is an incentive to get these companies to be bringing that clean capacity so that and more clean capacity to drive it up towards that 100% clean capacity number that we'd like to be seeing at every data center. In addition, connection to our grid is of critical interest to these data centers. They all want to be able to start operating sooner. That's how they make their money. The sooner they're operating, the better. And so we're offering to data centers that are willing to go to that 100% clean capacity, we're offering a fast track so that they can connect sooner. So that incentive is going to get them to that 100% number, because we think the 100% number matters, because the build out of renewable energy will make sure we can remain on our climate targets. And we needed an incentive to get them up to that 100%. We're not giving them money, we're just giving them faster connection. So these policies together are going to ensure that data centers that show up in Illinois are bringing their own new clean energy, and they're not impacting our capacity or our transmission and distribution costs. I do want to take a moment, because I know this is of interest to a lot of our members, to talk about the energy specific to munis and co-ops. So briefly, Illinois, many users in Illinois are part of an investor-owned utility. So think ComEd or Ameren. If you're getting your bill from ComEd or Ameren, you're on an investor-owned utility. Users that are not inside one of those two very large networks are often part of a rural electric cooperative. Some are part of a municipal. So if you're in Springfield, you're getting your power from your municipal power plant. Springfield owns the coal plant there. Others are part of a rural electric cooperative, which were these organizations put together to make sure that rural areas had access to electricity. These tend to operate outside of all of our energy rules. They've typically been sort of like carved out and they're doing their own thing. We regulate the investor-owned utilities like Ameren and ComEd. We don't regulate the RECs as much. We didn't want to do that this time. So a lot of the requirements that we're doing in terms of bringing your own clean energy, we're pushing those on the muni co-op side as well. So what are we specifically doing? One is that we're going to force them to, last year we passed a bill that requires the muni co-ops do some planning called integrated resource planning. We're forcing them to update that plan before they consider a contract with a data center. We're also ensuring that they develop rules that ensure that the costs of those data centers are not passed on to their consumers, just like we're ensuring the cost of data centers aren't passed on to the investor-owned utility consumers. And lastly, we're putting in the same clean energy requirements that they need to fully cover a hyperscale data center's energy needs if they're going to put a data center on their rural electric cooperative. So this is bigger than in the past. We've often not had the munis and co-ops covered by the big energy policy, and we want to do it differently this time. Okay, on the water side. Oh, sorry. On the community side, one of the big challenges you heard Robert talking about in Aurora, they're firing their jet engines to power their data. Their data center lost electricity because a substation went down, and they ran jet engines for 3 weeks or 3 days. Sorry, 3 days straight, I think, to create power to power their data center. That has a lot of impact on community, not just the noise, but they're running very high polluting. Those jet engines are not clean. We want to make sure that communities are protected. So there was protections that we passed in the last fall, on data center pollution impacts. But at the last minute, the data center snuck in a little 24-hour exemption. We need to close that because they should not. The emergencies that they are allowed to run their emergency generation for should only be literal life-threatening emergencies, not we don't have electricity, we want to run our data center. That's what backup generation should be used for, and that's what the Clean Air Act permits would require. So we want to close that loophole. We also want to make sure that environmental justice communities, which are communities that are experiencing exceptional amounts of air pollution, that we take a moment to actually look at the cumulative impacts of all the different air pollution sources and consider the data center in that context. So we're requiring what's called a cumulative impact assessment for those environmental justice communities. And this will make sure that we're not just considering the pollution burden on its own, but that it's considered in the context of all the other air pollution sources. We are banning non-disclosure agreements between communities and data centers so that a lot of times we're seeing these NDAs be leveraged as a way to mean that city council knows what's going on, the data center knows what's going on, but the public doesn't, and the public finds out about these things 2 days before they're being voted on for approval. We didn't want that to be happening, and so we're banning non-disclosure agreements. We're also requiring community benefit agreements between data centers and communities. And lastly, we're creating a hyperscale data center public benefits and affordability fund. And this is basically, if you're one of the bigger data centers, you've got to be putting money up front every year to go into a fund that will support things like low-income bill assistance, weatherization, energy efficiency, fixing problems with water distribution systems. These are pathways to get money into actually fixing problems in communities that have a data center showing up in town. And lastly, on the water side, the first thing we do is require them to be transparent about their water. So they have to create a water resources plan, water resources usage reporting, so that we know where are you getting your water, where are you discharging your water, how much of that water are you using consumptively, so evaporating away and it's gone, versus using non-consumptively, which means maybe you're discharging it. And what's the quality of that discharged water? So a full water resources plan at this data center. So we have that transparency because, as Robert noted, some of these facilities are going to be using crazy amounts of water. Some are going to be using a lot of water, but not a crazy amount. And it really depends on the technology that they're choosing. And so this transparency will let us really understand the difference there. Cooling water efficiency is a critical part of this. How a data center cools their facility is the largest water use on site. And so we require them to look at alternatives. How are the different ways that you're proposing a data center that you could cool it? What are the water efficiency of those alternatives? And that they have to use an alternative that is at least as efficient as a closed loop cooling system. Set the benchmark there. If technology evolves and things get better, great. Let them improve on it, but set it at the benchmark at that closed loop. This plan goes to the Illinois State Water Survey. They have all of the data statewide on water resources. They have a strong understanding of our rivers, of our groundwater, and they can do a report on what is the likely impact on our water resources from a data center. So they send their plan with a check to the data center, pays the Illinois State Water Survey to produce a report, and that's all of this is publicly posted. So the public has an understanding of the likely impacts of a data center. So that community or that county board or that city council that's considering has to really grapple with those numbers. And then lastly, this all folds into an Illinois EPA water impact permit. And ultimately, the Illinois EPA will say yes or no. If a data center is proposed based on all this analysis, they will make a determination of whether or not there's an adverse water resources impact, and they will not permit a data center that is likely to cause an adverse water resources impact. So that's the Power Act. We got water, communities, and energy. And I believe so one more slide for me. The legislative process. So how does this work? Well, this is a state bill. So currently the Illinois General Assembly is in our big spring session, which is the main session. Our bill is HB 5513 in the House and SB 4016 in the Senate. Those two bills are the same text, but the Senate version, the House version. In the House, our head sponsor is Robin Gable. In the Senate, it is Senator Villavalm. And other senators and representatives have signed on to these bills already. We're expecting a process of subject matter hearings. So that would be various committees having a hearing on the data center. You can tune into those and listen as the discussion evolves. They'll bring in testimony from the data centers, from our groups, from other interested parties to talk about the challenges with data centers. Ultimately, to pass a bill, you have to pass it out of a House committee and a Senate committee. And once you pass it out of the committee, it can go to the floor. So House floor, Senate floor. Doesn't have to be in that order, but first committee, then the floor. And if we pass it out of the House and the Senate, we've passed a bill, and it's up to the governor to eventually sign it. Our deadline to get it out of the legislative process is May 31st. That's when session ends. Last session, in the fall, there's a veto session. So if we don't make May 31st, we'll be back in October. Last year, at the end of the October session, they passed a transit bill at 3 a.m. So they'll stick around if they think they have a possibility. So we'll see how it goes. That might be the way this goes, but that's where we're looking at. So you'll be, I think Randa is going to step up next and talk about all the ways that you can participate, engage, take action in this process. So with that, I will hand it off to Randa.
Yeah, thank you, Robert and Andrew. Now let's take a look at some ways you can help push the Power Act through. Action alerts are the first way. We will be sharing links in the chat to that. These are emails that include language that we have taken the liberty to draft ahead of time, but you, as the constituent, can edit this and make it more personal or expand it to fit your unique concerns related to data centers. The next one is letters to the editor. These are a great way to share your concerns with your broader community and local leaders. These are often brief letters focused on one topic, explaining how your concerns impact the whole community, and are a great way to share data and facts about data center issues with local residents. Next, you can call your legislator. So on screen here, you can actually see our current sponsors of this bill. If you see your senator or representative on the list already, you could call them and say thank you for being a leader and supporting this bill. If you do not see them on the list, you should call anyways and ask them to support this bill. And then our last action that you could take is joining us for lobby days in Springfield. These events are a fun way to build momentum in Springfield. It allows us to directly speak with our legislators and usually involves a rally of some sorts at the end that brings together supporters from across the state. And it is always a great way to be in the presence of like-minded people during turbulent times. So save the date for April 8th for the Environmental Lobby Day and then May 30th for the Power Act.